Welcome to the broadcast, my dear old fruits. I hope you're having a splendid Sunday. It was wonderful to see the King and Queen this morning, rocking up to the church service at Craithie, Kirk, and looking full of good spirits, with waves for the well-wishers. Very encouraging, very reassuring. I am going to continue my commentary on the Harkle tour, and I will address a few comments I've had recently asking me to stop talking about the Sussexes and giving them attention. I won't be stopping. I will be continuing, and I will address your comments and concerns later in the broadcast, and we'll also have a bit of a history chit-chat for the second half of the broadcast. So you can skip ahead if you want to see that. Do as you will, my dear. We'll discuss that sort of thing later. But, oh, what is that I hear? The bongo drums. Indeed, the bongo drums have been communicating to us, along with various smoke signals, not from Montecito this time, but from the exotic climes of Colombia, of course, where the privacy tour continues in earnest. Prince Harry was wearing a blue linen shirt. I think he was copying mine a few weeks ago. It was just a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it, that I said I was getting into blue linen? And there he does it. Okay, I'm just teasing you, my dear. Actually, the deep shade of blue that he was wearing was deeper than the blue that I was wearing a few weeks ago, but I thought it was lovely on him. It makes a nice contrast, doesn't it? It makes his auburnish, the fading auburn of the dandelion affair, it brings out some of the reddish hues. Because red hair can be wonderful, can't it? The contrast between the blue and the red is quite becoming for him. So that was all right. And by the way, I've read several articles and also seen people online from Colombia saying that the local residents in the vicinity have no idea who they are. No idea who these people are, these random white folk. This is what they're saying. Who these white folk be? Who they be? Who is this ginger guy and the white lady? That's what they keep asking. And if you don't believe me, ask Justo Valdez, who was part of the town's welcome for the Harkles, and also the lead singer of Son Palenque, or something like that, Son Palenque. And he said to the Telegraph, "Who's that?" He said, "Who's Megan?" They were his words, "Who's Megan?" And he was there to welcome them. So the locale are obviously roping in various members of the community. Say, oh, there's some very important people coming. Come and welcome them, and we'll play the bongo drums, and all kinds of fanfare. Oh, yes, we'll come. Who's coming? Is it the President of the USA, various leaders from around the world? Oh, who? Who's Megan? Megyn Kelly? Oh. Megan the Stallion? Oh. What? Ragland? Never heard of her. Well, that's what they keep saying. And then he also asked the Telegraph which country Harry was a prince of. Had no clue even who Prince Harry was, my dear. So beware of the propaganda you see. Many of you are wise to this already, very wise to this, but some people don't understand the mischief they get up to. She was wearing Johanna Ortiz again. This time it was a deep ocean affair, silk crop top and a sailor print skirt. And I have received a few people complaining that Meghan shouldn't be showing off her shoulders. It's inappropriate. Well, you might be right actually for the occasion, but some people have been suggesting that it's too cold in Colombia to be showing skin. Well, I've seen dozens of ladies there around her also showing their arms and neck. To be fair, it seems to be de rigueur. And if she's got the sweaty patches that some people are saying that she has been brandishing of late, then that is evidence that it is obviously not too cold there at the moment. And indeed, I was unsure whether or not to broach this, but there have been mysterious shadows in the brown ensemble that she was wearing, and I flashed up an image of it for you the last time, but I didn't focus in on it because I thought it was rather vulgar. But on the subject of sweaty patches, Stardust Melody says to me, "I don't like when strangers force hugs on me." Now, I think that's because the Harkles go around hugging children and orphans and peasants and paupers, don't they? I don't especially want to be hugging their bare, sweaty back or shoulders. Well, when you said that, my dear, you put me immediately in mind of somebody that I used to know. I won't mention his name. And I happened to be working in the clubs at the time, my dear. sweatbox affairs. And this particular chap, and I expect we've all got them in friendship groups, haven't we? He was a friend of a friend, but he was a friend of the DJ, one of the DJs that I would follow around and stand on the door with my clipboard and say, you can come in, you can't come in, you know, door picker, door whore, as I was, extraordinaire party host, and still like to host many parties to this very day. And I'm in demand as a host, I will say. But I'm digressing. This sweaty boy, he sweat so profusely, and I feel very sorry for him. I really do, but it was absolutely disgusting. And the thing was that he was the hugger. He was the big hugger. I mean, we all used to go around kissing and cuddling, but as soon as he saw you, and everyone knew it, nobody spoke of it because they didn't want to be offensive, but he would fling his arms around you, and he knew that he was sweating profusely, dripping, beads of sweat dripping off of him, sweat patches everywhere, not just above but below. He didn't have BO. I will say I don't recall him humming, you know, as some do. I don't recall the hum, but it was the liquid. And it's, as you say, my dear, as hot as they get, and they're perspiring so much, the sweat comes off cold, doesn't it? At the time, I mean, we happened to have a slight falling out a few years after this. But at the time, I had nothing against. It was a bit of a yappy Labrador type, you know, so excited when the song came on. He was first on the dance floor, last off the dance floor, this kind of thing. Oh, my dear. You really reminded me of something disgusting, because how could he not be aware? And you'd clammy face, and you'd feel like you were walking around all evening with his sweat. And I remember one particular night, I was sitting in the booth, you know, sharing a cigarette with some of the gals, you know, pretending to work. And he came into the booth, and he sat on my lap. And he had quite thick, quite good legs, actually, I'll give him that. Thick thighs, sort of fleshy. And he was sort of astride me and sort of up and down. Oh, and I knew what was going to happen. And yes, when he eventually wriggled himself free of me, he did have a slight crush on me, I've got to tell you, my dears. I'll make no bones about it. So he was lingering a little bit too long, hovering on my lap, got up and walked away, and yes, I knew that it was going to be wet down there, wet down there. Well, as you can imagine, I disappeared for a quick change as soon as I could. But I say this just to make anybody else aware. You know, we have great sympathy for anybody that perspires and sweats or glows in such a way, my dear. But if you've got a crotch and a pair of armpits like Niagara Falls or the waterfalls of Timbuktu, think about it, my dears. Give us all a break. But back to the hundreds of comments that I received on the last broadcast about Meghan's look. Well, I am not going to flash up the images again, and I have no desire to inspect too closely what could be shadows, what could be stains, sweat or spills. Your guess is as good as mine, my dear. I'm not going to cast aspersions. But Nancy Meadows did cast aspersions. She said, "Hello, River. Speaking of Meghan's attire, especially the brownish pants and blouse she was wearing during the Q&A, that when they got up at the end of it, did you notice the literal wet areas on her pants? I had to look at this in close-up many times before this response to it, but sure enough, there were several wet areas." And she went on to suggest that it could be the effects of perimenopause, this sort of thing. Big Blue Sky said, "No comment about Megsy's sweat stains on those brown trousers. River, you are very classy. I am definitely not, and wouldn't have been able not to make a few snide remarks and put a couple of embarrassing jokes at Meghan's expense." Well, sometimes in life, my dear, there are no words. There are simply no words. And when I looked at that imagery, there were no words. Or to be more precise, silence is sometimes all that is required, and paints a picture and says it all. I really have no desire to furnish you with further imagery of that ilk, but indeed, shady as I can be, let's face it, I do draw the line at shaming ladies for possible oversights of the misadventures of Mother Nature. Should we put it that way, my dear? Bodily functions with undesirable consequences. But I will address, if not Meghan, then ladies in general, and those misadventures. What I will say and what I will suggest are hand fans, as I've done many times, something along this sort of line. You don't just have to use it on your face, you can use it on any bits that you fancy. You know, Meghan could have used one of them. And if there are leakages of any kind, then we have what viewers called a few weeks ago serviettes. The female serviette, or napkin of a kind, my dear. And there are various products that Meghan could go for. Have you heard of Tenor Lady? Tenor Lady. And indeed, I believe they even make them for gentlemen these days. What are they called? Tenor Bloke? So you could pass them on to Harry if he requires it. And antiperspirant sprays, you have those. I will confess to you, my dear, I haven't used a deodorant or an antiperspirant spray since my teen years. And you might think that's disgusting. Well, A, I'm extremely clean and usually fresh from the shower anyway. But second of all, they are simply not required. I don't know if it's because I haven't used them for years, but I never hum with those sort of odours or anything at all, and I feel very free. But some people do need them and do require them. We all know those kinds, and perhaps the Harkles are one of them, I can't say. And then, of course, there are feminine fresh solutions of many kinds. Someone in the comments suggested Botox in the armpit, and I thought that was a fabulous idea, because we can't all stay dry and sweat-free like Prince Andrew, can we? But the Harkles have furnished us and the press with more of their goings-on over the past couple of days for day 2 and day 3 of the tour. We've still got day 4 to come, haven't we? I expect it's going on now as I'm recording. But in this Colombian edition of the Worldwide Privacy Tour, they visited a school in the rundown district of Santa Fe. They joined school children for art sessions, for tree planting and meditation technique. Oh, Harry's a real expert at that, isn't he? And we were treated to some of their unusual dance moves yet again. Oh, they love throwing it down, love throwing it down. Hugs and high fives galore, and the children leapt into her arms, did you see? One in particular, she leapt into the Duchess's arms, the arms of a stranger, almost as if it was staged. Go figure. Go figure. Meghan wore a pair of Diana's butterfly earrings, or at least a pair that were very similar to Diana's, and she wore a Jamila blazer by Loro Piana and Chanel slingbacks, and she accessorised with children. Using the children. Terrible, isn't it? What did cheer me up was to see the Colombian school children in uniform. That quite surprised me, and they were looking really smart as well. So that was a blessed relief. A guard has been following them round, by the way. He's been sort of shadowing them, and he's been using a bulletproof shield to protect them. It's called a ballistic briefcase, and it protects them from potential shooters, and he's been seen emerging from vehicles just ahead of them as they arrive at various places, unfolding this shield and holding it aloft, as you can see here over Harry's buns. And then it was volleyball matches at a rehabilitation centre in Bogota, where they were visiting athletes in training for the Invictus Games, and they were welcomed by military officials and toured the centre's facilities such as the pool and the gym. And as I say, they took part in a volleyball match, and they were laden with a bounty of gifts: paintings, beaded necklaces, hand-knitted animals, and a commemorative plaque. And there was a second costume change of the day. She was fresh and clean, actually, in an ivory green chintz skirt and Jimmy Choos, with emerald and sapphire dangle studs. And then there was a private lunch hosted by the Vice President, where she addressed the audience in Spanish, we're told. I haven't seen video evidence of this yet, perhaps it's out there. But, oh, clap, clap, clap. She said, hola. She said, hola. Descomisados, perhaps she threw that in as well. Hola, descomisados. See, I can speak Spanish. She wore Oscar de la Renta in this bold azure blue. And then there was a tour of the music school. White linen she wore by Posse, with a crew-neck tank by Argent, and she clung to her man for dear life. Well, wouldn't you, if you had a cash cow? You wouldn't want your cash cow going astray, would you? Now, Lynn Pearson asked, can't we stop feeding these two and their egos? Any attention is better. I presume you mean they like any attention, even if negative. I think we are so over all the social media these two are getting and wanting, we need to stop even acknowledging them. And I read your comment, Linny dear, because I've had a few similar comments over the last few weeks. I understand that people might be tiring of Harkle behaviour, but I wanted to address all of you and say that you have the power to curate your own experience, and you are all welcome to do so, my dear. With respect, many of you can do this by beginning by not clicking onto videos that involve them, and then you won't see them. It's fairly obvious from my thumbnails and titles what I'm going to be talking about, and from the channel in general, and then people wonder why I'm talking about them. But as for me, I kindly ask people to refrain from asking me not to comment on their activity, because I'm always going to cover their activity. I created this channel in response to their disparagements, actually. It was after the Oprah debacle. I felt a certain type of way about it. And I felt a certain way about the kingdom and the reputation of my country, my people, being disparaged by those two. So it's the very reason why this channel sprang up, my dear. And I need also to enjoy and relish making the content for it to be successful. And I like conflict. A story needs conflict, my dear, and a bit of drama. So, I can't just offer bland reportage. Although I do often go for days, and sometimes even more, with very little mention of them. People forget this sometimes on weeks like this when they're in the news a lot and I'm coming to you regularly speaking about them. There have been weeks recently where there's been barely a whisper or mention of them. I've covered other subjects. I did a segment on Princess Victoria. No one watched it. But, I did it. I throw it out there. I tried to offer quite a bit of variety, actually, my dear. But I do use royalty as a base for many subjects. I find it quite handy to do so, actually, because it's a springboard for so much stuff that we talk about, and you know that if you follow every show. And I do try to get the balance as right as I can. But basically, what I'm saying to you is that I'm always going to chiefly report on the activities of the royal family, what they're going on, and pass on various whispers. And that does include Harry's family, even though he's not a working royal. We don't just cover that. It depends what's going on at the week at the time, my dear. And this is a busy week for the Harkles. So there we go. But we can have a little palate refresher in the form of the Mapelli Mozzis, the Derby and Joan of Windsor, or Love's Young Dream, as they are. These are the Mapelli Mozzis of Mayfair, and they are shown here with their groceries from M&S. Giggly groceries, aren't they a giggly, affectionate couple? And I'm surprised I didn't bump into them, my dear, because I get most of my groceries from M&S. And actually, I got the same thing as them. They were spotted with tomatoes from M&S poking out of their bag. I've got the same, but mine are from the organic. Come on, Mapelli Mozzis, aren't you getting the organic version? Honestly. Standards are slipping, aren't they? She was wearing oversized denim and a messy bun, and her beau was sporting a youthful cap and a tote with those veggies in. Vine tomatoes, they call them. That's another trick of the marketing, isn't it, and the branding, which we'll be talking about in just a moment. Vine tomato. Have you ever known a tomato that didn't grow on a vine? They really made a trick there, didn't they? Keep them on the vine, don't bother pulling them off of the vine, and add another £1 or £2, add another $1 or $2 to the price for the luxury of having vine tomatoes. That's marketing for you. But how can one fail to be charmed by their dizzy love story? Always a tonic. And now for a bit of history and a bit of Jack and Ori story time. James Percival says, "Hello, River. Heaven forbid that Harry ever becomes king. I hate to imagine King Henry IX as he would be. but his family nickname is Harold, so would he be King Harold I because they want to be first at everything? Well, this was rather a frivolous question, James dear, but I'm going to use it as an opportunity to furnish you with some trivia. Harry would not be the first Harold, the first King Harold, because the first was Harold Harefoot, possibly pronounced Harfoot by many, but I'm going to go with Harefoot today because I've never heard a historian use the name Harold Harefoot. He was the first Harold, and there was also a King Harold II who was Harold Godwinson, and he died in 1066 at the Battle of Hastings, and he was succeeded, of course, by the victor who was William the Conqueror. Notice that, Harry, a Harold conquered by a William. Yes, but it's rather an interesting tale, the one of Harold Harefoot, who was the first King Harold, an interesting tale of his ancestry, because in the year 958, Harold Gormson, which means the son of a Gorm, so he was the son of King Gorm, well, he became the Viking king of Denmark. And actually, as king, he was partially responsible for the introduction of Christianity to various shores of Europe. Well, poor old Harold had a bit of a dodgy tooth. In fact, it was so dodgy and rotten that it died and became a bluish grey colour. And of course, in those days, the features of an individual would be used to describe the person. And so he became known as Harold Bluetooth. And as legend would have it, it is because he actually sported a bluey grey tooth that was dead, although it is possible that it was to do with the fact that he was a blue thane as well, so that could have come into the equation. But regardless, in 970, another Harold Greycloak, who was king of Norway, was assassinated. So for a small wrinkle in time, Denmark and Norway were united, or perhaps it's more accurate for me to say that the various tribes of Denmark were united, and both Denmark and Norway were much smaller masses of land at that time in history. So, in effect, Harold Bluetooth had two empires connected as one, until many years later it became quite clear that they weren't compatible together. But until then, they were connected as one. And then, when you fast forward a further millennium, 1,000 years later, to the late 1990s, in fact, there were four very large tech companies who were all trying to come together and find a solution to a common problem. This was the time when computers and mobile phones, or cells, were becoming ubiquitous and were getting increasingly popular, but they were incompatible together. They couldn't do what they now do, working in harmony with each other. So in 1997, one of the team from Ericsson flew out to Canada to meet up with his counterpart, one of the team from Intel, these big tech companies. And they gave a presentation together about the new technology that they had been uncovering that could unify these devices, the computers and the phones, together, so that they could work in harmony. But the presentation received a very poor reception, and it didn't capture the imagination of their peers. It didn't make their pants ping. So there was a branding issue. It was actually a simple branding issue. They needed to come up with a code name that would stir the imagination and make the pants ping. And they did, because their technology so far had been given basic, boring code names such as MC-link, low power RF, biz-RF, very forgettable. And so after this failed presentation, they were dejected and they decided to go out for a drink. As you do, they headed to the local bar, my dear, to drown their sorrows. Well, as it happened, the chap from Intel was a bit of a history buff, and he took the opportunity to ask the representative from Ericsson about Vikings. Obviously he was Scandinavian. I don't think that he was Danish, because Ericsson is a Swedish organisation, a Swedish company, but they all had Vikings. It was all Scandinavia, so that was much of a muchness. And it was him who then went on to mention the ancient king, the ancient Viking king, who was a skilled communicator and known for bringing together and connecting and reigning over two kingdoms, and happened to be named after his dead tooth. Eureka! Bluetooth was born. Yes, true story, true story. It is a branding success story that came into being. And the logo that we all know from Bluetooth features the Viking rune symbols. One is H for Harold, and for King Harold, and the B obviously for Bluetooth. They're sort of fused together into the logo, so it's there for all to see. And Harold Bluetooth, if you're wondering what actually happened to him, he was killed by his own son down the line, who was Sweyn Forkbeard, and he became King Forkbeard, King of England, under the House of Denmark. And then his son, Canute, sometimes we'll see it spelt C-A-N-U-T-E these days, the one who famously tried to hold back the tides, but it was C-N-U-T. I'll be careful there. C-N-U-T, Canute. He also later became King of England, and he was also King of Denmark and King of Norway, and actually those three kingdoms together under his reign became known as the North Sea Empire. And King Canute's second son was Harold Harefoot, who went on to become King Harold I, and he is actually buried at Westminster Abbey. Died around 1040. And so there you have it, my dear. There is the connection. And who knows what King Henry IX would love to have been called if he were king, whether it would be Harry or Henry or Harold. But he could have been known in the days of the Viking as Harold Redbeard, couldn't he? Or Harry Gingerbeard, or Harry Lilyliver, Harold Little Willie, has no balls. Or one could simply rearrange the letters of King Canute. Thank you for furnishing me with your company and good humour. It is much appreciated. And if you'd like to treat me to a box of vine tomatoes, my tip jar is in the description box, and I thank you most sincerely. I will see you next time, my dears. Ta-ra, and channel the royal spirit. Toodle pip.